Thank you all for joining us for our last webinar session for the Summit on Women's Leadership in STEM, which has been organized by the Asia Foundation in partnership with the U.S. Department of State and the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. My name is Elizabeth Romanoff Silva, and I am Assistant Director for Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality at the Asia Foundation. The title of our session is STEM, Gender, and the Future of Work in the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the U.S. I'm thrilled to be joined by a stellar panel of experts to discuss these issues. So before we get started and dive in, I have created 2 quick polling questions just to let us better understand both who's joining us today. If you've attended any of our other webinar sessions, you will have answered this question before, but we want to know where you're joining us from, and then one specific question about the topic. So if you'll respond now to the poll, it will close in just a minute, and then everyone will be able to see the results. For the purpose of our interpreters who are joining in, I will read the questions. So which country are you joining us from? Is it Japan, the Republic of Korea, the U.S., or other? Please answer that question. And then, as movement towards automation intensifies globally, what is the most important action, in your opinion, to prevent gender gaps from widening further? So is it A, support more women to pursue STEM degrees, B, enact legislation policies that remove barriers women face to entering and advancing in STEM careers, C, targeted reskilling of female STEM workers, D, fostering social norms that support women's work and leadership in STEM. So I will just give everyone 1 minute to answer that question, and then I will ask for for our WebEx tech to close that and share the answers. Great, and yeah, I think if you could share that, if we have a good, okay, we have 55% have so far filled it out. So if you haven't, then please go ahead. Okay, and I think now is a good time probably to close it. Let's see who's joined us. Okay, so we have 47% from Japan, 9% from the Republic of Korea, 33% from the US, and 2% from other. Great, and then let's see if we can also see the other question. Okay, that's interesting. So it seems like fostering social norms overwhelmingly was selected as the social norms that support women's work and leadership in STEM as what's needed. Great. Okay, well, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So I just want to start out really quickly by reminding us about some of women's roles in STEM fields and specifically as mathematicians and computer programmers when computer technology was still in its early days. So for decades, many computer pioneers were women, including women in these photos. In the 1940s, women made up about half of people in the United States doing the advanced calculations that would later be done by computers. This is an early story of how technological advances transformed the world of work and impacted the STEM fields where women had made inroads. Even with the onset of digital computers, women were among the first original coders of early computers. And yet their stories, as is true in so many other fields, were rarely told. The rate of women studying computer science continued to rise throughout the 1970s, actually faster than for men, until the 1980s, when there was a sharp decline, leading us to where we are today. And if we could go to the next graph. Yeah, so this is where we are today. And it is interesting to just compare, computer science with, physical science, law school, and medicine, and just, seeing that sharp decline. Women make up less than a quarter of software developers in the United States currently. Less than 20% of Japan's researchers employed in R&D roles are women. And it's very similar in South Korea, where the tech pay gap is 41%. So in some cases, women are increasingly studying STEM subjects at university, but still, much lower percentage than men. And as we, learned yesterday in our Strengthening the Pipeline webinar session, there really is a disconnect between, university and then transitioning into STEM fields as well, where there's a big drop off. So not only are we dealing with current workforce gender gaps in technology and other STEM sectors, but the global labor economy is changing in a way that could exacerbate these gaps, or if we take action now, could create opportunities for women to further reclaim their place as leading computer engineers. So in this panel, we'll be discussing the future of work. And if we could go to, there we go, which generally refers to the changing nature of the labor market because of rapid digitalization and job automation that enable machines to take on human work. This digitalization automation is, again, threatening many of the jobs where women are concentrated, especially in the short term. And this will affect women and men differently. The significant gaps between men and women studying and working in STEM fields means that women are not positioned to capitalize on market opportunities emerging from this fourth industrial revolution. In the context of COVID-19 and this pandemic, economic trends really suggest that the global economy is moving even faster towards automation, even for service and hospitality jobs, where women tend to be overrepresented and which we once thought would be less affected in the near term. The Asia Foundation actually has a forthcoming policy brief produced in collaboration with the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, about the impact of COVID-19 on women and the economy. Our analysis highlights how COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted women. So, early indicators point to the COVID-related boom in the tech industries where women are underrepresented. Meanwhile, women are dropping out of or scaling back from the labor market during the pandemic because of increased needs to care for children and elderly or sick family members. As we all know, prevailing gender norms, that position women as family caretakers means that trend disproportionately affects women. And, that topic was explored quite a bit yesterday in the panel webinar that talked specifically about that topic. So right now, we really find ourselves in a pivotal moment to take stock of the challenges facing women in the changing economy, to take action to prevent gender gaps from widening further, which threaten global progress towards women's economic empowerment and equality. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be speaking with 3 experts to dig deeper into the changing landscapes of work and how it is affecting or predicting to affect women and men differently. So first, we'll hear from Dr. Elizabeth Wilke, who's a tech policy and future of work researcher at LinkedIn. Dr. Wilke leads the team's future of work research agenda, which is focused on surfacing insights from LinkedIn's data, the economic graph, that describe how technology, demographic transitions, climate change, and other global mega trends are reshaping the labor market. And we're thrilled to have her join us today. And next, we'll hear from Dr. Hye-Yeon Ahn, who serves as the president of the Women in Science, Engineering, and Technology, or WISET, in the Republic of Korea. Dr. Ahn has been in the IT industry for more than 30 years and is a veteran of cybersecurity. Prior to being inaugurated as WISET's president, she served as VP at SecureSoft and VP at Fasu.com. She's also a committee member at the Cybersecurity Management Institute and is a professor of cybersecurity at Ilo Women's University. We're thrilled to have you, Dr. Ahn. And then we'll hear from Dr. Kazuo Yamaguchi, who is a Ralph Lewis Professor of Sociology at the University of Chicago. Dr. Yamaguchi is an author of numerous publications on gender and employment in Japan, and also a comparison between Japan and Korea as well. And he's the author of the renowned book, Gender Inequality in the Japanese Workplace and Employment, which has received multiple awards. And this is just one of many publications that he has made. So we're also very thrilled to have you, Dr. Yamaguchi. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Wilke.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm honored to be here at this important event to talk about this very important topic and to share this platform with my esteemed and knowledgeable co-panelists. I'm going to talk today about the representation of women specifically in tech fields, where the gaps are and what we can do about it. So without further ado, let's go ahead. I'll go into a little more detail in the coming slides, but just wanted to outline key takeaways here. The basic story I'm going to tell is that despite progress on women in STEM fields more broadly, they remain underrepresented in the tech arena specifically. Because of the digital transformation already underway, the economic costs of that low level of representation are significant, and we are currently feeling them. And to get more women into tech fields, we need not only to increase the pipeline of talent, which is a serious challenge, but also to create supportive environments for career development and progression for women in tech fields. You can see on the graph in the next slide that women are relatively well represented across many important STEM fields. This graph here displays the proportion of female graduates from U.S. institutions of higher education across an assortment of STEM fields. The red bars are those where women are not represented at parity. The blue bars represent fields where women are overrepresented, that is more than 50%. Importantly, the only STEM fields where women make up less than 40% of graduates in the U.S. are in the three fields that are the most common source fields for technology roles: engineering, computer science, and engineering technologies. And the impact of this gap in the pipeline becomes very apparent when we think about the jobs they go to, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So LinkedIn partnered with the World Economic Forum late last year to identify emerging occupations for the future, those that have the highest growth rates and those that are most likely to impact the shape of the future of work and to be in greatest demand. In addition, we combined this identification with our gender data, and we showed in this analysis that women are 7 times less likely than men to be represented in cloud computing positions, 3 times less likely to be represented in data and AI occupations, and that in general, women in these emerging job groups were much more likely to be represented in people and communications roles and significantly less likely to be represented or employed in those technology roles. And as we go to the next slide, we'll see that this skew has real economic impacts. So in addition to the prior analysis, we partnered with the World Economic Forum to estimate the number of likely positions that will open up for each emerging job cluster in order to estimate the economic opportunity associated with each type of role. So looking at this table, one can see there are significant opportunities across all types of emerging job clusters, yet the expansion for technology roles is larger. For example, there's a projected 44% rise in sales, marketing, and content roles, but there's a 57% projected rise in data and AI roles. More importantly, the average starting salary in the US for a marketing manager is only 68% of the starting salary for a data scientist. The total gap in compensation, multiplied by the skew of women away from these well-remunerated roles of the future, speaks to a widening gap in economic opportunity for women, which affects their livelihoods and economic autonomy. So what does the picture look like for getting more women into the field? We'll talk about that on the next slide. This graph shows here the relationship between women in the talent pipeline for technology roles, that's on the y-axis, and the current representation of women in technology roles, that's on the x-axis. For most technology roles, the pipeline is larger than current representation, and that is very good news. But also note that the share of women in the pipeline is very low for most technology roles, and that is particularly true for the most technology-intensive roles. So for instance, for cloud computing and engineering roles, the share of women in the talent pipeline for these roles is only between 10 and 20%. So the pipeline is a problem, but we're also not getting enough women. We're not getting enough women into the talent funnel, but we are also not fully utilizing the funnel that exists, as evidenced by the number of data points that are above the parity line that's expressed here in the graph. So if you go to the next slide, we'll look at a very particular example. Cloud computing illustrates this point very well. So the bars are the magnitude of the gap between men and women, both in terms of the skills that they have, as well as their employment representation. So you can see here that the gap between males and females in cloud computing is around 2. That means that men are about 2 times as likely as women to have skills associated with cloud computing roles. Yet you can see that the employment difference is much, much larger. Males are about 7.5 times more likely to be employed in cloud roles. So while there is a gap between men and women in terms of the skills that they have, the employment gap is much, much larger. So where are all the women? Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about the roles that bias and behavior have in the workplace. At all levels, they play a significant role in advancing women in the tech workplace. So we know from our own research at LinkedIn that recruiters are less likely to reach out to women for tech roles. Females are less likely in the tech industry in general to see career advancement. So while women only represent about 1 out of every 4 people in tech roles, they're only represented in 1 out of every 10 tech leadership roles. So one of the major reasons why women tend to leave the fields in exit surveys is that they don't see career advancement. There are not only role models, there are not only a lack of role models, but there is also a lack of a vision for how they can advance their own career. And we know from other research, the language and culture of tech tends to be less welcoming to women, sort of at all levels in terms of the socializing that gets done on these campuses, as well as the way they describe their work, such as demanding or grueling or aggressive, tend to be less welcoming to women who may have different interests or desires for their work-life balance. My final point here really is that there is no silver bullet. Bias and behavior are embedded across our culture, and especially in the tech culture. If we are going to increase the representation of women in tech fields, we need to do all the little things that create a culture of welcoming and acceptance, provide role models, mentors, and advocates who want to develop the careers of women and ensure that they have as much chance to succeed as their male colleagues. And this is a particularly large challenge, but one that we have to take on as our own in order to not only make sure that women have pathways into these career fields, but also pathways once they are in these career fields in order to increase their overall representation and opportunity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Wilke. I really like that phrase, where are the women, which sounds, a little simplistic, but it's really not. And it's something that all researchers at every level really need to be asking. You mentioned the role of mentors and was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, some of the initiatives happening in the tech sector to address the gender gap, especially those that show, they might be working in particular, in the frontier and core technology jobs that you point to as being a major concern.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I'm actually going to give sort of a pessimistic answer, which is that the tech sector in general has been very aware of this gap for at least the last 5 to 10 years. It is not news to anybody that the tech sector tends to be unwelcoming to women. And despite that knowledge and awareness, tech companies in general, not to say that every tech company has not done a good job, better or worse job, but tech companies in general have not been very successful despite a number of initiatives. I will say that I think there is a gap in that a lot of resourcing in particular has been put on building the pipeline. I think there is an extant myth, right, which is supported in the data that there is a talent gap between men and women, and we've heard lots of statistics throughout this forum that men and women just are not interested at the same rates in computer science and engineering fields. That said, I think the data that I've brought here also suggests that there is real bias and discrimination in terms of what people think women can do in these fields. And a lot of the resourcing has been on building that pipeline, and I think we put less investment as a sector into bringing women in and also supporting them and mentoring them. I will put in a little plug for LinkedIn here because I actually think that they do quite well. So while LinkedIn actually has generally equal representation of men and women as the rest of the tech sector. So there is about 27% women representation, specifically in tech roles. We have much wider female representation across the rest of the business. But in leadership roles in particular, that number is much, much higher than 11%. And I think it's almost close to the parity of representation that women have in tech roles. I can actually name a bunch of women who are in tech roles that I work with on a regular basis. Our head of data science is a woman, and she is a very important role model, I think. We also have a very strong culture of professional development And so as the conversation about how to develop your career is really quite active. And I think that disproportionately benefits women who we know from other research tend not to be as assertive about their career development. So when managers and mentors and people who are more senior are constantly trying to develop your career and find out what your next step is and where you're going to go from there, that women disproportionately benefit from that because they are less likely than men to do that for themselves as well. So I think that there are some real bright spots, but as I said, I mean, it's sort of every little thing, and I won't hold up LinkedIn. I will put a plug for LinkedIn, but I won't hold them up as like a beacon of equality, because it is still true that we lack a lot of representation at all levels, and we do still suffer from some tech biases. But I really do think that shifting the focus away from the pipeline, because I think that actually just blames women for not being interested in computer science, when in 1,000 different ways the tech sector basically tells them that this is not a place for them. And I think creating an inclusive and welcoming culture is sort of the biggest thing that can happen, because it will keep women in and advancing their careers, and that will create all of that role model and visibility all the way down the line.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilke. And it also really underscores the importance of building up that evidence base and really uncovering what the gaps are. And so it really just kind of shows that there needs to be more research, like the research that you're leading as well. So thank you again. And with that, we will transition over to Dr. Ahn for you to give your presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, nice to meet you, everybody. This is Dr. Ahn Hye-Yeon. I am the president of WISET. WISET is the Center for Women in Science and Engineering and Technology under the Ministry of Science and ICT in Korea. Thank you for inviting and then giving me the chance to talk about the Korean situation for women in STEM. Next. Today I will introduce about the Korea's policy, issues, and programs for women in STEM, and I will mention about shortly the last few years' achievement and what we have challenging issues. Finally, I will mention about the current situation in Korea surrounding COVID-19 and digital transformation, and then share what we are trying to do in the future. First of all, next please. First of all, I think the Korean government played a strong leadership on gender equality for women in STEM. So we have a government-driven policies and system. Actually, we legislated a special law for women scientists and technicians in 2002. We call that the Act on Fostering and...
Dr. Ahn, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. I think it might be the headphones. Would you maybe taking them off and just, I think, just unplugging the headphones, it might make it a little bit better. Sorry about that. I want to be able to hear everything you're saying. I know the audience does as well.
Oh, now it's better?
Oh, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, I will try. Continue. First of all, I think the Korean government played a strong leadership on the gender equality for women in STEM. So we have a government-driven policies and systems. Actually, we legislated a special law for women in science, women scientists and technicians in 2002. We call the Act on Fostering and Supporting Women in STEM. And to implement this legal system and programs, WISET was established as a government-funded public agency for women. Next, please. And since 2004, we made the basic plans for every 5 years. Each plan has focused in some aspect. Now we have just started the first plan in last year. And in this period, we are more focusing on qualitative growth. Because through the last plans, we achieved some result in the quantitative sense. I will show later on. In each plan, of course, we had the numerical target, and I think we made a pretty good result, I think. As I mentioned it before, WISET was established in 2013 as a corporate body based on 2002 Act. on fostering and supporting women in STEM. And WISET was designated as public institution under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Science and ICT in 2017. First, one of our two key functions is implementing various supporting programs tailored to the need of women in STEM in their entire career pipeline. And second one is creating a favorable environment and culture in which women have equal opportunity of education and research in STEM area, as well as no barriers in their career development. Basically, next please. Basically, we are supporting the women in STEM through all the life cycle stage. So in each stage, we are providing the specific programs which are dealing different issues. We separated the stage in primary and secondary school, university, and early career, and we support the interrupted career stage 2, and also mid and senior level stage 2. For each stage, we are trying to figure out what's the issues and problems, and we are planning the proper programs to overcome the issues. Among them nowadays, I'm more focusing on some specific policies. First, for young students, I wanted to show more success story, a role model of women and women in STEM in order to improve the inflowing rate to new technology area. And strengthening the education and job matching specialized in promising new industry for women is also important, I think. And third one is in order to make more women leaders in STEM area, we started to make a career connection program for women in STEM through the mentoring and networking programs. Next, please. For more understanding of our program, now I will introduce two representing policies and achievement. First one is a gender quota system for recruitment. The goal of the policy is improving the rate of new R&D women workforces in STEM institutions. We apply this policy for 112 STEM research institutions funded by government. The target was 30% in 2018, and we overachieved this target in 2017 already. And for supporting this policy, we implemented the STEM Attach program, in which we appointed an officer, and their role is supporting and overseeing the system to promote employment and improve the condition of women workforces in STEM research institutions. For example, they make a kind of a question list, which shouldn't be done during the hiring interview, etc. And also we have an assisting grant program for women-friendly institution innovation project too. Of course, still we have dissatisfaction in many places, but at least things are improved. Next is the career re-entry program, which started in third basic plan. In this program, we support women returners to STEM R&D sector after career break. In this program, if they wanted to return to work, we are trying to match to university and public and private institutions and provide a grant for research during 3 years. Through this program, we have lots of success stories. Many women start for temporary position, but after 3 years, they have a much stable, good position. And career retention rate after 3 years is almost 80%. That means a really successful program, I think. Now next please. Now I will show another achievement in the sense of fostering. As you can see, despite the rapid decrease of school-age population due to low birth rate, we have getting more female college students in science and engineering major. And next, please. And also utilization sense, as you can see, and for these female STEM workers, we have getting better numbers, and we think of various kind of supporting program like a career entry supporting program for women in STEM influence this improved shape, I think, even though still has a long way to go. And next, please. And also gender gap has narrowed in STEM employment. As you can see, the gender gap in hiring, last page. Gender gap in hiring and employment, promotion, leadership has narrowed over the past 10 years. We keep monitoring the situation and trying to find the solution for improvement. As I mentioned in the next please, as I mentioned, definitely things are getting better, but still we have a lot of things to do, I think. First one is, in the Worsening sense, among some measures had a good percentage of female students, but some engineering major like electronic and computer engineering major has a still very low rate. It's almost the same with another data in USA data. Female student. Unfortunately, those area is a key industry and getting more people we need now and the future. The second one is even though the rate of new employees getting improving, the rate of the managers is still very low. We have to focus on it too. And third one is still when we review the participation rate in economic activity by age, we can find that the gender gap is very wide right after 30s. Definitely that's because of childbirth and then child rearing. And so in some sense of, national competitiveness in STEM area, we have to more focus on these issues, I think. Next, please. Now, in order to explain about the future work, I will explain the current specific Korean situation of COVID-19 and digital transformation. As we all know, because of the COVID-19, we are facing the rapid digital transformation requirement. So Korean government have, really big plan for that, and they will invest a lot of money for that too. But the issues are that we are facing the shortage of the skilled scientists and engineers for that. Maybe other countries have a very similar problem, but in Korea, because of the, our birth rate is very low, everybody agree with that. We have to seriously prepare to foster the talent in the digital transformation area, I think. So WISET is trying very hard to provide the education and training programs to cultivate the women professionals in this new technology field, like AI, big data, software, and information security, etc. Next, please. Another situation is the care button. Definitely in Korea, like other countries, many challenges are taking place due to the COVID-19. There are many research showing that pandemic is generally more vulnerable to women's job and living than men. Burden of unpaid care on women is a common phenomenon, I think. In particular, in Korea, among OECD countries, men have the least amount of time to devote to housework. Not surprisingly, many women are struggling with unpaid work. However, in case of the STEM field, female workers do not seem to have been seriously affected due to COVID-19 in a relative sense, because they are relatively high education and are engaged in skilled job. The table shows the trend in the number of employment by industry compared to the same period of previous year. It can be seen that the number of employment has decreased overall, but the number of employment of professional, scientific, and technical activity and ICT industry has not decreased significantly. But anyway, still many women in STEM also are struggling because of the care burden. I think it should get better. I explain, next please. I think, lastly, I explained, I will show what will we do. And I explained the two situations. Of course, right now it's too early to talk about the bright future, but if appropriate action is taken, the changes brought by the COVID-19 may be beneficial to women in the long run. That's what I'm thinking. There are opportunities for women, such as increasing demand for employment thanks to the digital transformation and uninterrupted career due to flexible work environment, So what WISET is trying to prioritize is providing job training opportunity for women to diversify and advance their career path to the future. In particular, WISET planned to provide the proper training courses in response to the rapid technology change. For example, training courses for being freelancer data analyst, or training course for instructor of AI, big data for K-12, etc. In addition, we plan to expand the service for more women in STEM through the platform we call WBridge, in which we provide the information service and online education and job matching and networking and other career support. That's all I have in today and what we are trying to do in nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahn. That was fantastic. And WISET is engaged in so much. It's really exciting to hear, both about progress we're seeing as well as WISET's work and where it would like to go in the future. To build on that, so you mentioned that while improving, there still is a substantial gap in women's participation in STEM, specifically a low rate of women in engineering and also as managers, I saw in the graph, in STEM. And so moving up the ladder to leadership just does seem like it continues to be a challenge for women in STEM, which is also something that Dr. Wilke mentioned. I was wondering if you could share a few key policies or programs that you think are necessary to close the gender gap and allow women to both enter and advance in STEM fields, especially thinking of just in terms of future of work, the digital economy and those advances in technology that we do expect to see in the future.
Yeah, actually for more women engineers for new technology area, first of all, we are trying to discover and demonstrate the success story because, it's very rare so far. So we are trying to find the, real role model to young student or college student. So they are already working in that area. So, and then they made some success story. So when we trying to, introduce it to any next generation girl, it's really working for that too. And also we're providing, more training courses and then education program and new technology area. What you can do, what kind of a work you can, make it like that. And then for more manager group, we provided a various kind of mentoring and consulting program. So if they have some kind of difficulties or feel lost, they can find, they can always talk to senior in same field. And I think, that kind of things really helpful to, women, I think. And of course, we provided the education program, become a manager. And also we are planning to make a more strong policy is a gender quota system for female manager at public organization in STEM field. Still, we are discussing about, what's the right target or right percentage goal for female manager in a leadership position. But still, it may working for public organization, but I think it will have an impact of a private sector too. That's what we are trying to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ahn. And we will come back during Q&A to ask more questions. But I'd like to turn the presenter role over to Dr. Yamaguchi to please give your remarks, Dr. Yamaguchi.
Hi. I'm very honored to be able to participate in this session and also share the view with distinguished panelists. And I'd like to talk about gender inequality in Japan and STEM-related occupational careers. Next slide, please. So some of the major topics I'm going to clarify, I'm going to focus on is there's a clear evidence that increasing proportion of women pursuing STEM-related college majors will be a very promising means to reduce gender inequality, occupational leadership roles in Japan. And that's it's going to be provide evidence, some evidence later. And yet, the gender discrimination remains prevalent both in college admission and employment. Women in Japan continue to have fewer educational and social opportunities compared with men, and there is often discouragement of women pursuing professional career except stereotyping feminized fields and roles. I'm going to also provide some evidence. So the private sector, the government has been, Dr. Ahn described some of the government initiative to promote women's participation in society, but the Japanese government has been also supportive in recent years, but there's a serious problem mostly in the private sector and also education, including public education, which I'm going to talk about. And then coupled with the persistence of traditional gender roles at home, this further limits women's in STEM-related professional careers in Japan. I'm going to focus mostly on the first two topics. Next slide, please. So the evidence, the first is very, very depressing for Japan. Actually, the women in STEM-related profession in OECD countries, Japan is the lowest proportion, about 25%, whereas USA is much higher, and South Korea is actually third from the bottom, or 35th, but still much more ahead than Japan. The next slide, please. And I'm just focused on physicians because I'm going to focus on more in-depth analysis in the next slide. But for proportion of women among physicians is also smallest in Japan among OECD countries, and you can see that Japan and South Korea has very low compared with these two countries are outliers, even though physicians actually becoming physician is a popular sort of professional career among other countries in OECD countries. Next, please. Next slide, please. And the fewer women among physicians comes mostly from the fact that they are the qualified specialists in medicine is much fewer, and that also comes mainly from the fact that students in the medical schools or Department of Medicine is fewer for women compared with men. And I have a decomposition analysis from the data to what are the sort of causes, intermediate causes of a small proportion of women among students in medical schools and medical departments. And sex ratio, which is actually the men is slightly greater, explain about 8%. And the second, of course, factors, gender inequality, college attendance rate. Japan is still one of the two countries among OECD countries where the college attendance rate for women is lower than men, and that's explained about 22%. And there was some evidence that some professional medical schools has discrimination against women in college in admissions, and that actually is seriously explained 25%. But the most serious cause is actually there are fewer women who apply for medical schools among those who admitted into college. So there seems to be compared with men, and that seems to be sort of discouragement is going on for women to apply to medical schools, and that also applies to STEM area in general. Next slide, please. So there's some indirect evidence for discouragement. For example, the primary school girls' dream jobs for USA in the 1917 survey, the first is among girls, and the primary school girls. First is doctor, the second is veterinarian, the third is scientist. These are sort of more in the STEM area. And in Japan, for example, in this national survey taken for 2020, this year, first was eatery owner, the second is kindergarten teacher and child carer, and the third is nurse, which is more extensive, still typical of women's roles in the family as well as in the labor market. And still, the dream girls indicates that their socialization has some problems in Japan to motivate women to getting into a STEM area. The second evidence is that the gap between girls and boys in Japan, the affinity for science, increases with age. For example, and there's a 10% gap in primary school between boys and girls who like science, but it doubles in the middle schools, and further increases in the high schools and so forth. There's an increasing gender gap among people who like science between girls and boys and girls. And also second school principals, STEM teachers, and teachers who are appointed by principals to college guidance are mostly men, more than 90%. for each category. And there are reports on the prevalence of cases where female students were discouraged by them to go into the STEM field. So it is deeply rooted from early socialization to early schooling, which discourages women to go to STEM area. Next slide, please. And in general, I have to make a distinction between two professional types. One is a so-called type 2 profession, which includes human service profession, where normally we have more women representation, such as education, health, and social welfare. But type 2 profession includes leadership roles, and mostly they are middle to lower tiers of profession among those human service. And type 1 profession includes all non-human service, including all STEM-related profession, as well as high-status human service professions. And you can see that Japan has serious underrepresentation of women in type 1 profession, which includes all STEM profession, which is less than 2% among all women in the labor force, compared with, for example, with the US women at 13%, in Korea and 4%. So Korea as well as Japan has underrepresentation, but Japan's underrepresentation for those professions is much more serious. Next slide, please. And I have some empirical analysis as well as simulation analysis, whether this is due to inequality of educational opportunity. And actually, there's a paradoxical result. The equalization of college attendance rate actually increases rather than decreases gender segregation of jobs, especially among professions. It is because if the current linkage between education, qualifications, and profession continues, the majority of the women goes to type 2 professions, which are already seriously underrepresented, even more for under equality of college opportunities, rather than type 1 professions or managerial jobs. But there's an exception in my analysis. When the college majors, which are also very discrepant between women and women, the so-called index of dissimilarity, of which is college segregation measures of majors, indicate more than 0.5. That is about 50% of the college majors are discrepant between men and women. And for science and engineering majors, only 17%, 17% are women in recent time. But that is equalized between men and women. And women has the same proportion of science and engineering majors than men. Then actually 20%, about 20% to 50% of the gender gap in the attainment of the type 2 profession, which includes all STEM jobs, STEM-related jobs, actually will be reduced. And that's variability, and 20% to 50% actually reflect. Only equality of educational opportunity in college majors is reduced, then about 20% decrease. If occupational opportunity among those who majored in college and majored in engineering and science is also reduced, then there will be 50% reduction in type 1 profession. So there's a significant evidence that promotion of women in STEM areas reduces gender gap in attainment of the type 1 profession, and also related gender gap in wages significantly. Next, please. So last topic is gender inequality. What happened in the COVID-19 situation in Japan? Women are more disadvantaged as actually the result of vulnerable employment status, where more than 50% of the women are irregularly employed, and well, 15% of men are irregularly employed. And those are mostly women, the people who get unemployed, and also less opportunity to re-employed. And that leads to also higher unemployment rate. So women get higher unemployment under COVID-19 situation and lower re-employment rate. And that's mostly reflect women's status of being irregular workers prior to unemployment. And also household divisional labor is worsened actually. There's a significant inequality in the household division labor in Japan, while most of the household chores are still done by wives among dual honor families, but the situation even worsened under somehow in the COVID situation. But there's some good indication for improvement, because there's a demand for more demand, well, much less demand for routine clerical work under COVID situation. About the demand supply ratio is 0.3, where women's has been dominating, but they have a dead-end jobs. So these jobs would be mostly eliminated from the labor market. But there's the increase in care workers as well as IT-related work. And actually, the IT-related work is about, Japan has slightly over 20% of women in the area, and actually it's better than average proportion of math and engineering majors. But recently, the government also, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, try to relate diversity promotion with digital transformation, and appealing this to the private sectors. But whether the private sector comply or sort of take those initiatives positively or not is not yet certain. Okay, that's all for my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Yamaguchi. And you've done a great job of painting a picture of the challenges that women face, and including some promising approaches. And I wonder, if you could just elaborate on, any outliers or trends when women stand out from the norm in your research that we could learn from, and perhaps figure out how to replicate and take to scale. Is there anything you can elaborate on about that?
Yes. If it is outlier, is really limited a group of people. For example, there's still in Japan that among business executive class of the business in large and medium-sized firms, it is nearly 1%. So the glass ceiling is actually at the middle management levels. And I have analysis of how the firms do actually. There's firms characteristic which makes the most differences regarding promotion of women to middle management levels or equivalent professional leadership roles. And that's actually the organizational characteristics where there's especially in particular, where the devoted center for promotion of diversity, work-life balance makes a big differences among firms. Among those minority firms which has been already a devoted center or a department which promote diversity, and then there's much more representation of women in management. And at the same time, actually, I have also evidence for those among those firms that gender wage gap also becomes smaller without reducing men's wages, but increasing women's wages. And also, there's a increase in the labor productivity among those firms. So it is quite rational for firms to have promote diversity, especially women's utilization of female human resources in management and high status professions. But somehow the traditional sort of promotion system, which emphasizes long-term system and long hours of work in Japan, which is handicapping women's commitment as much as men, given the incompatibility between family and work and family roles among women, is still hindering for firms to take advantage of those taking diversity promotions in firms. But there's quite heterogeneous among firms, and the number of firms who recognize this rationality of promoting diversity is increasing, but unfortunately not very fast, slowly.
Great, thank you for that, Dr. Yamaguchi. And now I think we're going to remove the PowerPoint slides and just come into a larger Q&A with anyone who would like to ask a question. So please type your questions into the chat box. And we have already received a few. Let's see. So there's one question from Deidre Araujo, who says that the idea of changing the problem set resonates with our own research informing Science Center exhibit design, EDGE. And we welcome help developing more paid internships around the public understanding of science at the Exploratorium. So I guess I might just ask any of you to weigh in, on, just kind of that idea of how paid internships can help young women get established in their chosen, field in STEM, as well as, just responding to that question. Everybody.
Okay, I'll go ahead. LinkedIn actually does have a very robust paid internship system. Interns come anywhere from 3 months to 6 months, and we basically hire them just like we would hire anyone else. We pick people that we think will be successful and that can find things that they really want to work on. There is a lot of effort to actively recruit a diverse pipeline of talent into them, and we actually fully expect people who have been through our internship system to, it's great recruiting for us. We want them to have a valuable experience. We want them to really get their hands on projects, and we want them to want to work for us when we come back, because they already know the business, they already know how things work, and they can hit the ground running in ways that people who have not been through those internships can. So I think that internships, particularly paid internships, because unpaid internships tend to disproportionately benefit people who can afford to pay themselves while they are doing internships, are a really fantastic way not only to build experience on the part of the intern, but also to build a worker, hopefully, and a pipeline for us of really talented individuals.
Great, thanks so much for that, Dr. Wilke. Let's see, a question for Dr. Ahn. What are some recommendations you have for others who are interested in launching an initiative like WISET? It does seem like a very, very unique initiative, and just I'm curious to hear what lessons you have for others.
Yeah, I think for these issues, the government role and leadership is really important. In most of the country, definitely the organization which is in charge of the fostering and utilizing more women in STEM is really needed and an important issue. Because of the difficulties which they have, and the way to support them is really very special and professional work, I think. And also, this kind of a policy and programs should be done continuously without interruption. So it is really important that one specific institution has to keep monitoring and then analyzing the issues, what's the problem, and then finding the new policy and a new program for everybody for every pipeline period. So definitely, I think government should fund it for this kind of organization is really important, and then we are trying various kind of programs. So maybe every other country can referencing our model. So you can find that there's some better model maybe.
Great, thank you so much for that. Let's see, Dr. Yamaguchi, it was very interesting to see, the survey about young girls' dreams and the big, difference in the United States versus in Japan, with only, one of the top occupations preferred by young girls being, science related. I think that was, there was a nurse as one of those options. As you noted, this really highlights how important it is to shift norms towards girls in STEM from a really young age. And you highlighted the importance of transforming the education sector in that regard. I'm just wondering if you feel like, the media might also play a role in shifting gender norms towards encouraging more girls to engage in STEM fields, or changing, the types of toys marketed to girls, and whether that might have an impact as well.
So, certainly the media can play important roles, especially discouragement which is described partly comes, or mainly actually, I would say mainly comes from the lack of role models in that area, because there are fewer women in the STEM area as established scientists, then there's no information about, or very little information about girls to aspire to become a scientist. And you talked about outliers, and there are actually distinguished scholars in women scientists in Japan as well. So those kind of information about the career of those women are more disseminated and incorporated in education as role models, and there will be and also media coverage of those women. Then there will be some kind of significant impact. So the media is important, as well as those dissemination of those information about those role models in primary and secondary schools.
Great, thank you for that answer. I don't know if Dr. Ahn or Dr. Wilke, either of you would like to weigh in on that question specific to Korea or the U.S.
I mean, I'll jump in and actually refer to what you put in your opening remarks, Elizabeth, is that there was this big increase up until the mid-1980s, and then the rise of the home personal computer and the fact that computer games in particular were all targeted towards boys in the home, and that they were not targeted towards girls, I think has been credited as a major driver of the increase in the interest of men in computer science and coding and programming, and the subsequent decrease in the interest of women. There have been surveys that show that girls did not have the same kind of access to personal computers in their home, and that they were not encouraged to use computers in their home through the 80s and 90s and even well into the 2000s, which is partially responsible for this stereotype, right? That we all know the stereotype of the geeky, kid with the glasses and, in movies, weird science, portraying these sort of super nerd boys, always boys. I think that trend is starting to break now. I think that for young girls in particular, there are more role models, but we're effectively trying now to break a habit that we have built over the last 30 to 40 years, and that will take time. I think that the more role models we can put where women are both interested in computers and coding and, video games, the more we can combat that. But I think we're trying to eat away at the habit that we've built for a few decades now.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks, Liz. Let's see, just looking through a couple other questions that we've gotten. Let's see. Here we go. So Dr. Ahn, you shared information about how the gender quota system, to get more women into R&D within the government-funded STEM research institutes. And this has had an impact in terms of improving the male-female ratio. And you mentioned that there may be a quota for female managers as well. Could you share some insights on how policymakers might encourage these kinds of quotas or proactive female recruitment among the private sector as well? Should be mandated, or is there a persuasive business case that works in Korea to improve gender balance in STEM?
I think it's really not easy to make a mandatory for commercial part, private industry, I think. But that's why what I'm thinking is at least we have to make some kind of a policy for public sector first, and then if they have some, if they can show some kind of a good result for that, because of that policy, in that case it will take some time to see the result, but still, finally, in a short period, hopefully, after 2-3 years, at least that can be a choice. Otherwise, it will take a really long time to change, So, manager, a lot of female manager can possible, but still, and the barrier is really high. So I don't think it's really not easy to being like that. So what I'm trying is, what we are trying is at least to show something, some kind of result through some kind of a policy, some kind of a mandatory policy. So, we can show the result and then, hopefully they can follow them.
Yeah, it will be interesting just to study what the impact is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Related to that, we did get a question from Kazuo Suzuki, specific to Japan, that says, I wonder why most Japanese are against the installation of a quota system. And wondering, Dr. Yamaguchi, if you'd like to weigh in about that.
I think it's, well, actually, Japan passed a role in parity system to target equality of opportunity among candidates for elections, the national councils, but National Congress, I'm sorry, but there's no penalty or non-complying, and that's going to be recently the issue, and whether we should have some kind of fixed quota or not, because just making a target effort to make equalization of opportunity in the candidate doesn't seems to be working very effectively. But there is some resistance to have to introduce. Well, Korea introduced affirmative action law for 2006. There's a debate. There's a discussion on that whether Japan is going to introduce the same kind of thing. But there was some kind of resistance to target the equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunity. So many people and politicians are supportive about equalizing opportunity in various ways, but the quota system, in some senses, actually try to attain equality of outcomes directly, and that somehow there's a very strong resistance to that in Japan still. But of course, equalization of a candidate is equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome, because outcome will be made by voters.
Yeah. So organizations are already finding it hard, in general, to pull in enough recruits, with the advanced digital skills required for an increasing number of jobs. For organizations to thrive, throughout and beyond, the 2020s, how should we invest, and this is open to anyone, in women to develop generations of agile learners, with the newest skills.
So one of the things that we talk a lot about with respect to the future of work is sort of lifelong learning and agile. And I think that companies themselves actually don't really well understand the human capital and talent that they have already installed and how close that talent could be towards being the people that they need to be, right? So that's not to say that external recruitment and bringing talent in, especially to do data and analytics work, isn't important, but there are, especially as data analysis and business analysis as a portion of data and AI, like analytics and data science, becomes easier all the time, right? So one of the reasons that data roles are so in demand or so tight is not only because data science is highly valuable, but currently data science is quite difficult for people that don't have the skills. I think that is likely not to be the case that far in the future. There is already a huge proliferation of tools that are expressly designed to simplify the data science and analytics profession, such as Tableau, such as wrappers for R, such as like the interface for SQL, such as Power BI is a really powerful data analytics tool that you don't need to know a single line of code in order to use. And I think that because of the incredible economic value of data and the sophistication that you currently need in order to do it, there's large economic incentives to creating software and tools that will simplify that task. I think that's actually a really prime area for reskilling, particularly of women that are either early or mid or honestly even late into their careers, especially because women who are already doing these functions actually know what the data is for and why it's needed, and they have what we call the domain knowledge to act on that data. it actually doesn't take very long to become trained on many of these tools, right? We all know that you can be trained as a data scientist or business analyst in 6 to 12 weeks. And I think that if employers could tap into the talent that they already have and could recruit from within for people to take on more data and analytics roles in particular, this would be an opportunity for women to become more competent with the use of data and analytics, which would not only benefit them in this job, but would also benefit in any job that they were to move to after that, because this digital transformation is not going away. Now, I'll say that with a caveat, because if what you really need is a cloud engineer, you are probably unlikely to retrain, right, your in-house economist or your in-house HR person to do those sorts of things, but you don't necessarily always need to hire your outside talent. I think that women who are already in these roles, right, and who are excelling professionally really do have an opportunity to transition with relatively little skilling or time in training to these more data-focused roles.
Yeah. I think, totally agree with, her opinion, for especially in a data analyst part. I think, that's why I made some kind of freelancer data analyst training courses for women. That was really successful. I think, that kind of, I had been working in IT industry, a long time. I don't feel any, difficulty in moreover, what you mentioned, getting easier, and then, women can handle a lot of data because, they have more common sense, and then they have very specific attitude. So I think it's really, but still, the problem is that they don't know what to do. They don't know what it is. That's why I'm really trying very hard to introduce this kind of job is there, and then, you can handle it. Or you can be an expert for that. So we are trying to introduce what it is, what you can do like that. So that's really important to, let them know what kind of change is happening, and then what you can find, nice things, what they can do. It's really important, I think.
I'd like to also add a comment on that. And there's organizational issues, especially in Japan. There's certainly probably in Korea as well, because in Japan, the career within the organization is based on the long-term employment system and the investment of the so-called firm-specific human capital on a personnel and employees. And then, however, of course, the IT technology is completely different, because it's already it's not a firm-specific skill. It's universal skills, and so at the same time it's shared, updated every day, and that kind of a profession has not been nurtured in Japan, because they consider personnel to be developed, human capital to be developed within the firms rather than given in outside of the firm. Then that's kind of the organization culture has to really change, and there should be a place for professions which is short-term in terms of commitment to firms, at the same time have certain big decision-making roles within the organizations. And those kind of system change of the organizations is really necessary for Japan, to some extent is Korea. And that's a different thing with American labor market, where the people are mobile and based on more on the skills and professions in terms of their human capital capacity, which is more, goes across firms and universalistic. But in Japan, the kind of tradition of sort of culturally embeddedness of the human capital production seems to have to change. And there are firms which are quite aware of that. Is going to do that, but still they are not the majority. They're mostly IT-related firms, rather than a major, for example, manufacturing firms, which also have IT components within.
Great. It reminds me of the something that a panelist said yesterday, asking the question, what does it mean to be a woman in STEM? There are many diverse pathways to transition, into the STEM field. And it kind of made a light bulb go off in my mind of how, this whole discussion of reskilling, women that are playing different roles within companies through short-term training. It doesn't need to, you don't need to, have to have studied always for, to receive a 4-year degree to enter into the STEM field. Related specifically to, an issue that we know is very prevalent in Japan and Korea, the aging population. We have a question from Melinda Pavic in the chat that says, women have long life and health spans, and many women are more available for work after their child rearing is complete. How can older women break into STEM careers? So wonder if any of you would like to weigh in on that question.
Well, I can talk about not a case of Japan, but we can talk about a case of the Sweden, where women have actually a much longer time before retirement and commit to have a full-time work for longer than many other countries, and even OECD countries. But that actually is actually related to women's status in average wages, for example, or the Swedish women compared with men is very, is comparable even for certain area higher, and that's actually competitive, especially not much in the U.S., but especially Korea and Japan. Women's labor force participations are abundant, but it's marginalized in some sense. Many of them have dead-end careers where people don't have women do not have much of the incentives to commit for long time, even though their longevity is becoming higher and higher, and so retirement age is higher, and there are certain mandatory retirement ages also, which is going to be postponed. But whether women is willing to postpone is socially uncertain, because basically that as long as the career are equalized between men and women, and there's an incentive for women to continue the job for long term, then of course there will be a positive effect for women's labor participation as well. And that's also related to sort of life cycle deficit issues, where the aging society, of course, there's an increasing burden of the public payment for supporting elderly people, which has been supported at least for people who work and retain higher productivity. But short span of the work for people who are employed is actually worsen the situation of the aging society in that sense, with sustainability issues. But if you look at the case of Sweden, which is quite sustainable because of both men and women, especially women compared with other societies, have been very productive for a long time, and is contributing greatly to the sustainability of society. Of course, there are many other aspects in Sweden which is good, but it's just one aspect. Unfortunately, Japan and Korea are opposite. Yeah. So even though retirement ages exist for both men and women, women tend to retire or at least quit the labor market earlier than men.
I think in Korea, for that issue, we realized about 10 years ago, that's really a serious problem. After master and PhD degree, they quit the job and then they cannot start again. So that's why we made the, re-entry program. And then we are supporting about, 400 people every year. So, when we see that kind of, success story after, finishing that program, that's really, I feel like, we have to support them, because, they are really happy about that, after some time. So they change the major and then they find the, some new role or new job kind of things. So I think, government should make that kind of, supporting program. It's really important, I think, because, they cannot find themselves the problem. So we are trying to extend the supporting amount, supporting people. That's what the situation in Korea. Because we need more people. We have to use that resource for make it stronger.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Ahn. I guess just as a broad question, thinking about, future of work and the advancements in automation and digitalization projected to accelerate, in Japan, Korea, and the U.S., what are, the 2 or 3 top things that need to be done to ensure women are able to equally access and excel in, these high growth technology fields of the 21st century and beyond? So I know that's a very large question, but just we would love for you to weigh in, any and all of you. There have been a few themes that have come through on your presentations, but would love to kind of, if we could summarize a few of your key, recommendations and needs that you see.
Well, I think the enforcement of the equality of occupational opportunity is by far the things which needs to be. Gender equality of opportunity is the thing which needs to be realized, because reflection of the women's discouragement, which I described, is actually the discouragement of the women through education process, which I described, is a reflection of the actual reality. The women tend to have less aspiration for STEM area because there are currently much less opportunity for women open to those areas, and that's actually should change. Without changing one, it is very difficult to change the other as well. So they have to go simultaneously, but at the same time, it seems to be currently the same. The inequality of occupational opportunity, which is embedded in a system of employment, which in Japan, especially, value long-term commitment and long hours of work, which makes women to be very difficult to attain any specific professional career, given also inequality of household division labor. And that's going to have to be both changed. Of course, government has been supported recently especially for balancing work and family issues in enacting various laws which are related to the enhancement of the balancing work and family. But again, the private sectors who actually try to take into advantage of those initiatives of the government is not the majority yet, and somehow the many firms have so-called traditional Japanese employment system, which tend to discourage women to pursue career, and that's going to has to be changed to begin with. And also, I agree with the statement that labor mobility is really related, and have to be more flexible labor market and more wide opportunity outside of the current employment for many employees. Right now, the emphasis on lifetime employment system is that opportunity only exists as long as one commits to the single firm for a long time, but not otherwise. But that, of course, hinders women's opportunities. So many of them still quit at the time of child rearing, and then return as irregular workers rather than comparable regular workers, which they had before quitting the firm, before child rearing time.
Thank you. Dr. Ahn, Dr. Wilke?
In Korean situation is, Korea situation was really not good. You saw that, Japan and Korea is the worst country in the sense that, but, what I feel is, still very is there, but, things are changing very fast in the sense of culture. So everybody agree with that, girls should be work in the professional area. So everybody support, at least the family support. So what I'm thinking is, in this culture changing, we have to support, they can find the good job and a good position. When we support them, we can find the good result. That's what I'm thinking. Because, culture can change. I can feel that, culture is changing right now. So we have to support them in looking for, finding the good job or good work. In that case, we can see the good result, I think.
I think I agree with Dr. Ahn, and actually Korea is changing more rapidly, and I can see exactly the role of the women in drama. The TV drama is very changing, and there's much more positive description of the women's professional role in the Korean drama than in Japan. Unfortunately, Japan is still slow in changing sort of image of the women with occupation in drama.
Yeah,
Korea is really rapidly changing.
Yeah.
But that should take place in Japan too.
Dr. Wilke, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think, I'll go back to my first point, or my point in the slide, that I think there is not enough that can be done to really advance the careers of women who are already there, right? So we have, 3 men for every 1 woman in tech right now, but that's 25% of the labor force in this field. And the most immediate thing you can do is keep them in that field, progressing and advancing, and subsequently mentoring and advancing and progressing all the women that they are attached to as well, right? I think that that creates mentors, it creates role models, and it also normalizes the place of women in tech. They become the norm and not the exception. And the network effects that I think you can see from that are going to pay off. I think that in addition, the expansion of technological skills into every single educational track that universities and colleges provide. This is what's the word? This is not founded in science, but I really do think that we think about computer science and coding and tech as this wholly separate track, and then there's everything else. And I think to the point that other people have made, that for women in fields like psychology, biology, sociology, economics, to get exposure in their field of interest to coding, big data analytics, and seeing the power that it can have, it becomes a thing that is integral to what they are interested in, and that they can use in their fields, or they can switch fields, right? And I think that by making computer science a thing that you're expected to know as part of your career, that will get you both more computer scientists and more women in other fields who work with data and computer science in order to further themselves in their own fields.
Great. Thanks so much for that, all of you, for weighing in. I think as we are, needing to wrap up relatively soon, I do have one more question just to ask you all, building on, what's already been said, is just, that unequal care burden and how that's a challenge in all 3 of the countries. Dr. Ahn shared statistics on the disproportionate burden that falls on Korean women. Dr. Yamaguchi, you touched on this as well. Saying the gender gap related to unpaid care work and housework has gotten even worse during COVID. As COVID-19 puts a spotlight on these care issues, curious, just to hear from you about, the potential that these gender norms, are able to be changed. In the three countries, are there promising practices from government or private sector to transform these gender norms around care that may help more women in STEM stay in their fields and advance professionally? And especially thinking of the next generation and, just kind of how we can change those norms around unpaid care responsibilities as a key issue inhibiting women's ability to enter STEM. So I know that's a big question, but really, welcome y'all to weigh in on that.
Well, I'll go ahead and say, in the United States, it's really quite difficult to juggle those things. And I think I recently saw the latest surveys that men now do more parenting than they ever have, but they actually don't do very much more housework. And the intensity of both of those activities has actually increased over the last 30 or 40 years that we've been keeping track of what Americans spend their time doing. And so I'm not 100% sure where exactly that time is being apportioned, but women are definitely falling out of the workforce as a result of COVID in order to deal with these increased demands. Part of that is particularly because they did have a childcare solution and now they don't, right? I think that in normal circumstances, right, the presence of available childcare is a huge lift off the backs of women to manage these things at home. But I will say I don't think that it's just childcare. I think that it's other kinds of care. I also think that it is the emotional and mental labor of keeping a household, whether or not you have children, of making sure that the dishes get done and that the house is clean, or managing for someone to come over. I don't think that women with children are the only women who have caretaking or home responsibilities that just tend to fall on them more naturally. I will say I don't think we have great statistics on why this happens or what necessarily would change. So for instance, it is true that men in partnered relationships tend to earn more than their female partners. And it actually makes economic sense, right? If one of you needs to take on more non-remunerated work for the person who is less remunerated in the market to take on that work. And so it's possible that if we put more women into very well remunerated STEM jobs, their spouses might not be as well remunerated. And if you believe, right, that households can bargain to maximize utility, right, that it would actually make sense in more cases if women were in these well remunerated roles for men to take on larger portions of the caregiving, because that is just what makes economic sense for them, right? So for women to have formal, full-time, well-paid jobs, whereas currently they're much more likely to have informal, not very well paid part-time jobs, it makes a lot more sense for women who have just sort of by definition more flexibility in their work arrangements, partially because of gender roles, right? Partially because, right, those are the fields that they choose to enter, which also are affected by gender roles, but that we could actually see a shift there. And I think, for instance, in tech in particular, we don't actually know if women in technology roles are actually following that same trend, right, that men in tech or that women in other roles are following.
Thanks, Dr. Wilke. Would anybody else like to weigh in? Dr. Ahn, Dr. Yamaguchi?
I mentioned it, in my presentation already, unfortunately, among OECD countries, Korea men is, least amount, they spend least amount of time to devote to the housework. That's really pain. And then in Korea so far, women has to work both, career, professional job, and then housework too. So it was a really painful situation, but things are changing really fast, as I mentioned it, because, I can feel it. My husband don't know, he doesn't know anything about the housework, but, my son does cooking, and then, he never think about, women has to do only in the housework. So that means, young generation is changing very rapidly. They think, both the husband and wife should work together, and then that means, they share equally housework too. So that's really a big change. So I think things will change. But problem is, I think a government should support some kind of child care system. Otherwise, the child care is really the issue. Housework, it's much more easier situation, but, child care is always the burden. So I think, government should support the plenty of, child care system. In that case, it will be solved it will be better in a short period, I think.
In the case of Japan, actually, the government support for child care has been expanded quite a lot, and like some European countries, there's not only the period of parental leave is extended to 1 year, at least 1 year to 1 year and a half, but also income compensation for during that time is increased gradually to more than 50%. And because of the gender wage gap exists, if the primary caretaker can has only take advantage of this parental leave system, then it's tend to become women to take a leave, because the 50% salary is different between husband and wife. But if it has become more 75% or 80% or so forth, then there should be much less gender gap issues involved in who's going to take a parental leave. They can take turn, actually, and there's a father quota, which is now taken by wives. And also, so there's been great support for a child care system, but the problem is actually in the private sector's firms, which do not really consider these issues in terms of gender equality. They take women's leaves to be taken for granted, but men's leaves not to be taken for granted, and that's for gender role is actually imposed in partly from the employers, even though the government at least try to promote gender equality, and also try to support employed women for in various respects. But it has been actually situation has been improving. Of course, I understand. For example, neither Korea or U.S. doesn't really have an income compensation, which is government initiated. It's just private sector initiatives. But in Japan, it's public, and it's like some European countries. So, and fertility also has been. There's evidence that availability of this at the time of the transition, which I actually analyzed, the availability of a parental leave actually increased significantly the fertility rate for women. So there's a positive effect. And also continuation of the jobs at the time of child rearing. Also the rate of job leaving at the time of child rearing for women is also reduced. So there's a significant impact of the government policy in attainment of the work and family balance.
Great. I feel like we could continue this conversation for a while, but I realize we are coming up to the end of the panel, and just want to thank the three of you so much, Dr. Ahn, Dr. Wilke, and Dr. Yamaguchi, for wonderful presentations, a very lively discussion. And this will wrap up our final webinar from the Women's STEM Leadership Trilateral. We actually have, I think, one final poll to ask the audience. If we could pull up that final polling question. So we asked this question at the very beginning of the Summit on Women's STEM Leadership of how do you plan to, as an individual, kind of promote what you've learned at this trilateral, in the future. And now we'd like to just ask this question to the audience one more time. How do you individually feel like you can best promote women's leadership in STEM? Is it A, write a blog or promote on social media? B, debrief colleagues on lessons and takeaways? C, work on enabling policies and/or programs? Or D, And there's even an E. D is seek out or provide finance and funding to support women STEM entrepreneurs or women in STEM in general. And E, organize forums or events to sustain the spotlight and focus. I almost feel like these are, they can be trick questions because, I always would like to select all of the above, but, just in terms of priorities, would be good to hear from everyone. So we'll give you a minute to just have everybody fill that out. And we will see what the responses are. Let's see if we can see how many people have filled it out already. See if our WebEx producer can provide us with that information. So we have, okay, give it a couple more seconds. If you haven't filled out the poll, go ahead and do that. And then let's see if we can see the results. If you don't mind. Let's see. So it looks like, debriefing colleagues on learnings and takeaways, and working on enabling policies and our programs came out on top. So that's great. It's been such a pleasure to moderate this session, to discuss these critical issues related to STEM, women in the future of work in Japan, Korea, and the U.S. And we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll come back with some final remarks. And then don't forget, for all of you who are planning to participate in the networking session that is beginning at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 9:30 a.m. In Japan and Korea, please keep that on your calendar as well. So thank you all again, and we'll now close out of this session.